Hello and welcome to another episode of the Breaking Muscle Podcast, where we bring you conversations and insights with some of the most experienced coaches in all of sport. I am Peter Hitzeman, your host and the managing editor at BreakingMuscle.com. With the 2017 World Championships and the American Open Finals in our rearview mirror, the future has never looked brighter for Olympic weightlifting in the United States. Records fell, and American lifters took historic podium finishes, capped off with Sarah Robles sweeping the gold medals in her division. With 9 nations banned from competition as a result of sanctions from the World Anti-Doping Agency and the International Weightlifting Federation, these may have been the cleanest world championships in the modern history of the sport. But we're a long way off from declaring this a post-doping era, and it remains to be seen if weightlifting can recover its image from that of a dirty sport, like baseball and cycling have struggled to do. National-level weightlifting coach Daniel Bell of Rubber City Weightlifting sat down with me to recap Worlds, talk about the future of the sport in America, and explore the damage that doping culture has had on even clean athletes. We also cover why women are flocking to, and succeeding in, weightlifting faster than men, why it's stupid to have PRs in your assistance exercises, and the dilemma of transgender athletes in competitive sports. If you like what the Breaking Muscle Podcast does for you every week, do us a favor and head over to iTunes or Google Play Music or Stitcher, subscribe, leave ratings and reviews, and share the show with your friends to help us get the word out. And as always, if you have any comments or suggestions for the show, shoot them over to editorial@breakingmuscle.com. Joining us this morning on the Breaking Muscle Podcast is national-level weightlifting coach Daniel Bell of Rubber City Weightlifting. He's joining us from Anaheim, California, where he's getting ready to coach his athlete through the American Open. Coach Bell, thank you so much for making the time to sit down with us this morning.
Oh, happy to be here.
So we've reached an interesting point in weightlifting, probably I would say that one of the most interesting points in weightlifting history, although I'm not nearly the student that you probably are, where the powers that were have sort of been kneecapped, and rightly so, and the American weightlifting movement is on the rise. So I want to talk today about kind of this turning point and where we think weightlifting can go as a sport. And I want to lead off with kind of a question that may not be able to be answered. Was the 2017 Weightlifting World Championships the cleanest worlds to date?
We'll know when the B samples come back. But if I had to guess, I would say yes. I mean, the 9 countries that were banned, that took out a lot of the people who would have taken medals from potentially clean lifters.
Right.
I was pretty happy about that. Pretty unhappy that it was a 1-year ban and that they'll be back for Olympic qualifying.
Except Russia, they have announced they've banned them entirely from the next winter. Well, from the Winter Olympics. We'll have to see how that goes.
From the Winter Olympics, yeah. My sport's weightlifting. I like the Olympics overall. After what the Russians did in Sochi, they don't deserve to come to the Olympics. But it's not just the Russians. It's
sure.
A number of former Soviet republics. You got to remember, I grew up during the Cold War. I did the duck and cover shit in grade school.
Right.
So, I've never been a big fan of Russians, especially lately. Given what the McLaren Commission and Rodchenko has come out with,
right.
and meddling in our election, my lifters know that I can't say Russian without saying those fucking Russians.
I had a conversation once, a kind of off-the-record conversation once with another national-level weightlifting coach, and he explained that when he was face-to-face with their coaches overseas, he kind of learned something about it, which is they think we're crazy for not trying to win. Like, from their point of view, and I'm not saying their point of view is correct by any means, but from their point of view, they think we're nuts for not cheating. Like, why wouldn't you cheat to try to go, win the darn thing?
I was talking about this with my wife. We talk a lot about this kind of thing. She's an attorney. And she had some experiences in grad school overseas where we just sort of take the general level of integrity in this country for granted. It's not the case in much of the rest of the world. When people are trying to take advantage without regard to any level of personal integrity, they think of Americans, as a lot of them, as foolish. Mm-hmm. When we were moving Rubber City Weightlifting this past summer, a Thai man who was going to open a store in our space was there. And I was talking to him, and he was a recent immigrant. And I asked, what is different about this country from yours? What makes it easier to start a business? And he said, in his home country, in Thailand, 80% of the officials are corrupt, and you need to bribe them, and it makes it prohibitively expensive. He said here, 80% of them aren't corrupt. So, I think we take personal and institutional integrity in this country for granted, and it's not the case in a lot of places in the world. My personal feeling is if tomorrow, those substances that are banned now are not banned and perfectly legal to use in the sport, I no longer regard you as a cheater, and I have no problem with you using them. I'm fairly libertarian about that. Mm-hmm. But as long as it's banned in the sport, as long as it's illegal to use in the sport, you're a cheater, and I've got no time or respect for you.
Yeah, it's kind of like them's the rules. There are definitely performance-enhancing substances that are legal. I mean, caffeine is the most commonly used performance enhancer in the world, and we all abuse the living daylights out of that.
And I'm probably more guilty than most.
So what can weightlifting do to rescue its reputation, right? So it's on the verge of being banned from the Olympics, which is a crime because it has Olympic in the name, for crying out loud, and for a lot of other reasons, but that's the easiest one. How long does it take to, or can weightlifting overcome its reputation as one of the dirtiest sports?
I think it can. For so long, we were way behind the former Eastern Bloc countries and probably China and a couple other Asian countries, but mostly the former Eastern Bloc countries. As far as our technique went, that has changed dramatically. I mean, high-level American lifters' technique is as good as anybody in the world. The internet has helped that. The huge explosion of interest in this country has led to many more coaches, many more voices. We've caught up as far as that goes. But we've got to get the drugs out of it. The average person, they don't know what they're looking at, but I think the average person is repelled by the idea of the rampant drug use. Mm-hmm. I think that's the only reason the IOC is taking it seriously now is because of that fact, and it will cost them money. Because you've got to remember, the IOC, the Olympic movement, is not about any ideals or anything. It's about money. And it's about those people keeping their places and keeping their huge paychecks. When it costs them money, shit will happen. So,
right.
Yeah, I think it's possible to clean up. If we follow, the recommendations of the several different commissions about what to do and how to clean up as you pointed to, the Russians think we're crazy. They don't understand. It's a culture of doping. Mm-hmm. They literally don't understand how to get strong without the drugs. One of the mistakes that we have made several times is hiring former Eastern Bloc coaches to come make our athletes as good as theirs. Well, they get here and they find out they can't use one of the most essential elements of their program, the drugs. They don't have any idea how to train people without drugs.
Let's hit the brass tacks of that real quick. So when we say they can't train their athletes without drugs, what we're really talking about is the recovery potential that you gain from some of these substances, to where you can handle degrees of volume and intensity, both volume and intensity, that you could never handle clean, right? So how does that affect your overall program if you're trying to create an athlete from zero?
I think part of their program, creating athletes from zero, is they really don't start applying the drugs until late as a junior, until they get to be a fairly high-level junior. Mm-hmm. But as far as training athletes in the late intermediate and advanced and elite level, you can't hit them with that volume. You can't hit them with that intensity as often. They need periods where they really need to back off. They need periods where they need a lot more recovery time. There are still some lessons to take from it. I like the idea of after a major meet that athletes get an entire week off. They don't even have to come in the gym or think about weightlifting. One thing the Russians used to do is, they probably still do it, is they would plan their cycles on Olympic quads, and after the Olympics, they'd get a month off of doing anything but weightlifting. Mm-hmm. And because of the load that they used on them, they had to have that. Mm-hmm. But we've had a couple of former Soviet bloc coaches who, when they got here, destroyed athletes at the National Training Center. If there's anything we've learned, and Don McCauley said this a lot, we don't need a National Training Center. Most of our great athletes never came out of there anyway. We had more Olympians come out of the little gyms, garage things that we used to have than we had come out of there. Those guys would come in and in the first 3 months injure half or more of the athletes. They ended a few careers.
Oh, wow.
And at least one that I know of had a couple of my former athletes had meetings with him where he said, what are you willing to do to be the best? Basically came in and tried to get him on that program.
Yeah. Well, and I think weightlifting in America has a greater chance of being clean than football, basketball, the big money sports, because there's so much less of a financial incentive to the athlete to pursue those things. There's not a cost-benefit ratio that would incline someone toward doping, I guess, in weightlifting, because, I mean, a great way to become a poor person is to take up weightlifting as your profession, right? So,
boy, do I know that.
So, but right now, with the greater scrutiny coming down from WADA and from the IOC, it almost sets the American team up for greater success, and that has, borne recent fruit both at Rio and in the Worlds this weekend. I saw that the women's team actually ranked second overall, took home three. Sarah Robles took home 3 golds, which was a remarkable achievement in itself. And then Maddie Rogers did quite well. We had a number of women who placed quite highly. The women are leading the charge in weightlifting right now, which is kind of exciting to see. What's holding back the men, if I could ask?
I think men have many more opportunities for high-level sporting success after college than women do. Probably our world-class supers or our world champion supers, 105s. I mean, they're playing football at a high level in college, or they're in the pros, baseball. They just have so many more opportunities for that level of athleticism to rise. Women just don't have that. And I think they're attracted to this because, there's no rap on powerlifting, but weightlifting allows them to be athletes. It's not short, slow, grinding movements where I think they're afraid of getting huge. But, weight class sport, you get to be an athlete. And I think we have more women registered than men in the sport. I'm not sure about that, but it's pretty close to even, or they have a few more.
And that's remarkable given, 15 years ago, I can't imagine that would be anything like the case.
Oh, when I started, the Ohio State meet, Lou DeMarco would put it on in the little high school gym where, he was the principal. There'd be 25 guys, maybe one woman, and he had a little box on a table when you come in, just, throw $5 in there and that's your registration. Things have changed quite a bit. Our Ohio State meet now, we'll get 150 lifters and it has to expand to 2 days.
Yeah.
It's often half women or more.
That's outstanding. And, the videos I've seen coming out of that, there are some legitimately talented lifters showing up at the lowly state meet. This isn't even an American Open level. The other thing I noticed watching the few bits that I could watch at Worlds this year, looking at the American team, they're all quite young, either chronologically young or young in the sport. How long can someone stay at the top in weightlifting? It's a sport that's pretty freaking hard on your body at the top level. So are we looking at a 10-year lifespan for some of these athletes that are already at Worlds that could maybe stay in for that much longer?
I think here again is another way that I think drugs affect the sport. A clean athlete has, I think, a better shot at a long peak. When you're using, steroids, HGH, the things that will grow muscle much faster, you get the spectacular injuries in athletes who've been on that stuff a long time. Elbow dislocations and torn ligaments, evulsions. I think those are more prevalent if you've been on stuff for a long time. I was just talking with my lifter, Tino Vargas, about this, that I hope I'm right, that Lydia Valentin has been trying to do this clean or pretty clean for a long time. But she's been at that peak where she's snatching in the, 115 to 120 range and clean and jerk in 140 to 145 for many years. She just won her first world championship because she had a shot. because of those 9 countries that were banned for drugs. I do think a clean athlete can stay at their peak for quite a bit longer.
Well, and she's a great example of someone, she's very, very strong, make no mistake, but she's a great example of someone whose technique is so flawless. Watching her winning snatch this past weekend was just, I must have watched it 100 times, because I wish to God someday I can land one snatch that's that just beautifully perfect. Her torso is super upright, and the pull is like super vertical, but that has, when you do it right and you don't over muscle it, you don't overpower it, when you do it with sort of the fluidity and grace, that's where you avoid those injuries, because you're putting yourself in the most biomechanically advantageous position through the whole sequence of the lift, rather than just throwing the thing up and praying it lands and then kind of half standing it up with a twist. And some of the other things we've seen from mostly dudes, mostly the male athletes tend to kind of over muscle stuff. But
well, and I just generally, I think we've had a history of overstating the technical prowess of those former Eastern Bloc lifters, because they are so much stronger than they need to be for the lifts they're doing. A lot of times they do muscle it. They have some good technicians, but they have as many people who are just butchers. So
yeah. Yeah, well, so let's touch on that for a second, because there is kind of this quiet sidebar discussion among weightlifting coaches about the relative importance of strength and technique, and obviously you need both to be competitive at any sort of high level. But is there a point where your squat gains are not really important anymore as a lifter? Like, how do you kind of balance those needs for your athletes?
If you're squatting north of 300 kilos, you're probably about as strong as you need to be for this. I mean, you can always try to get stronger, mm-hmm. but it reaches a point of diminishing returns. How much more damage are you doing to yourself? How much more focus are you putting on getting strong that's taking away from becoming more technically proficient with that strength? This is and will always be a strength sport. In general, the strongest people win. But if you have 2 people more or less the same strength, and one's a good technician and one's a butcher, the technician's going to win.
Do you use like ratios to monitor the progress of your lifters? In other words, like their deadlift to squat ratio, or their jerk to strict press ratio? Is that something you kind of pay attention to?
Yes. When I get down on the Russians and the Soviets, it's not like they didn't know anything or didn't learn anything. Some useful stuff came out of there, and quite a bit of it. Some parts of it we give too much credence. One of the things that I do find useful is the old Soviet ratios. They were all based on your best clean. I actually have those written up on the board, and they've proven to be a pretty good guide to when my lifters are getting technically proficient. When they get to the point where they're pretty close to those ratios, I know that we need to maintain their technical ability, but really need to focus on getting stronger. Probably longer strength segments and shorter competitive segments. Were you about to ask, what are those ratios?
Sure, let's go there. What are those ratios, Coach Bell?
Just in general, you need to back squat about 130% of your best clean. You need to deadlift about 135%, and snatch between 78 and 82% of your best clean.
And that's pretty standard across. I've heard a lot of coaches quote those numbers, probably because they're all reading the same publications. But yeah. I found that does hold true. And one of the underrated benefits of paying attention to those numbers is, I think, injury prevention. So what I've seen a lot of weightlifters who get laid up is because their numbers are way out of whack. In other words, they can squat, substantially more than they can deadlift. So they're going to be nursing a posterior chain imbalance compared to their anterior chain, if you will. So it's important to kind of keep those numbers in check and know what they are, at least, so you can make sure that your body is functioning and your joints are going to be aligned, and all the nice things that happen when you have correctly balanced strength across your body. So what kind of do you work deadlifts specifically with your athletes if they're in that, or what kind of corrective programs do you find yourself using a lot?
Well, I don't know about corrective, but I think everybody needs a deadlift. I mean, it's nearly as important as squatting. I mean, weightlifters got to squat. I think there are a lot of coaches that avoid the deadlift just because there's so much posterior chain work in lifts from the floor anyway, and a lot of low back stress. But if you're going to get a strong posterior chain, you've got a deadlift. Now, we almost never go for limit singles. we do a very strict clean or snatch type deadlift and try to keep it as close to the lift as possible. And I generally have them do triples and doubles just because as soon as somebody has to do a single in something, it becomes a contest even with themselves, and technique goes out the window. So, yeah, but we definitely deadlift. I almost never get away from deadlifting.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of triples myself, especially for the deadlift. Just because I always feel like my second pull is a lot better than the first one. Just coming off the ground, it always seems like you're trying to fix something on the way up, but the second pull always seems to go a lot better. I want to touch on something that you mentioned there, is that you don't really go for singles and stuff like that, and you avoid that competition on things that aren't your competition lifts. So you posted a screed, if you will, a while back on Facebook about stop trying to PR everything. So what have you run into? Yeah. And that's a hot button for me too. Is people making up new PRs, new things to PR. So what kind of a counterculture are you running with that?
Well, I just don't want to see people like there are exercises that have a specific purpose, like the muscle snatch. It's in my mind, its specific purpose is to teach you the transition of leg action to arm action, and give you a very efficient and aggressive finish to the arm action in the snatch. The thing that turns that from a technical assistance exercise into stupidity is trying to hit a PR in that, where people turn the bar over at their chin and then make it a wide grip press. Probably unhealthy, certainly not useful for becoming better at the snatch, and just fucking stupid.
Not unlike quadruple body weight sled pushes with your feet. I don't know if Tino can hear me or not.
But boy, did I not program that. That was supposed to be body weight, sled plus body weight. I don't know how it turned into that. And the next week, I wrote that on the program. Not a kilo more than body weight.
Very, very specific. You got to keep these guys in line somehow, for sure. So we mentioned a minute ago how dramatically the sport in America has changed over the past 10 or 15 years, and obviously the thing that we're kind of alluding to there is the huge cascade of athletes that CrossFit brought into the sport, because all of a sudden people were aware that you could do more with a barbell than curl it in the squat rack. So I want to kind of get your take, because you've been in this game for a very long time. You've been a strength and conditioning coach for 4 decades, and you've been specifically in weightlifting, I guess, for almost 20 years, right? So you've watched the whole thing happen. What has CrossFit brought, and what has it maybe taken away?
It's brought an explosion of interest in barbell sports. So we're located in a gym that has a pretty good powerlifting team. I was talking to the coach, Justin Oliver, and because I wondered, is CrossFit bringing people into powerlifting? I asked powerlifting, even despite the huge number of different organizations, has brought a huge number of powerlifters too. Many more to weightlifting. One of the things that I've found is people will find those barbell sports through CrossFit and then decide they really hate breathing hard. so they fall into my lap. And I don't want to excuse myself here. I've been critical of CrossFit and the coaching that they get in the lifts in CrossFit, but I've changed my thinking on that, because it's not just an explosion in athletes, it's an explosion in coaching. And the more coaches we have, the more voices we have, the more people figuring out what works and what doesn't, the better. And I stopped thinking of it as good coach, bad coach, because, for a major league pitching coach to look at a high school or little league coach and say, that's a shitty coach, is wrong-headed. What it is that's the coach for that level. That's the coach that's teaching them at that level. CrossFit, I would think of as like the little league or high school coaches of weightlifting. If they have lifters that want to go to a higher level, they'll move up from local meets to the state meet to qualifying for the American Open, and they'll probably have to find a coach more dedicated to the sport.
Yeah, and that's something I've kind of brought up before, because relatively speaking, I'm definitely a novice coach and will probably remain so for quite some time, and that's fine. But some of the top-level coaches who sort of poo-poo CrossFit as, you guys aren't really teaching weightlifting and that sort of thing, it's like, look, dude, where were you when you started? Like in the same conversation with that same coach, I can start talking to them about how they got into coaching, and they will without a filter, tell me all the shitty mistakes they made and the athletes they ruined, and all the
Oh,
rough
yeah.
times they had as a beginner. And I mean, when you're a beginner in sport, you're going to be bad at it. That's where I'm at. When you're a beginner as a coach, you're going to be bad at it. That's also where I'm at. So the trick is to do the best you freaking can. Try not to make any irrevocable mistakes. Don't put anybody in the hospital if you can help it. And otherwise, just keep learning and talk to guys like you to get better at your stuff. And learn as much as you can from the guys who are, no kidding, at the top of the game and have been there for a long time and have seen it and done it and tried it, so you can kind of not make the same mistakes they made when they were young coaches.
Well, believe me, I made mistakes. I wish I could go back and apologize to a good dozen athletes that I had at the beginning who had tremendous potential, and I just destroyed it. So
Yeah.
I didn't know what the fuck I was doing.
Well, what's the next step forward for coach education for weightlifting? I mean, obviously we have the level program, the coaching level program with USA Weightlifting, which leaves some things to be desired, obviously. But how can we create a larger, more professional coaching base now that we have this huge wave of enthusiasm?
I thought about that, and there's some problems with every approach. I like the introductory course that we have, the way we've modified it, and it's getting better right now. Poor Mike Conroy, the coaching education director, against his will for a good couple of years now. He and some other people are doing the best they can to rearrange, restructure the program, make it more organized and more professional so he can get out and actually retire. Because what he'd like to do is go back to the gym and actually coach athletes again. I think the course for the entry level, for the level 1 course is good. The level 2 course, I think that's still 1 day. No, it's 2 days too. But that's where they introduce a production requirement. I mean, you have to produce athletes to fully get the national credential. I think you have to qualify to the American Open or Nationals or Junior Nationals, and they have to go compete in total besides the course. Now, right now, everything above that to move up the coaching ladder is purely production. To move to the international level, you have to have 2 athletes on an international team or 1 on an Olympic team. What I'd like to see is continuing education, especially in things like programming. I'm constantly rearranging things, rethinking things. One of the things that I find myself doing is getting back to the idea of training being a prescription, and you want the absolute minimum effective dose to maintain progress, because that also maintains length of career and health. But I don't think we talk to each other nearly enough about programming. There's no strictly organized approach for coaches to talk to each other about how they program, what's worked, what hasn't. Bob Tucano put out a pretty good book on it, very basic periodization based on the Russian model. But we really don't get a chance to talk to each other much about that or have continuing education on programming like that.
Yeah, I think programming is one of those things that everybody assumes everybody else has figured out, and then it ends up that nobody talks about it. Part of that is because there's a general fatigue, I think, in the fitness industry to talk about programming, because we did so much of that conversation for so long. And for general physical preparation, for GPP programming, oh my gosh, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting 5 or 6 free programs that are all fine and will all get you to where you want to go if you're just looking to be generally fit. But for weightlifting specific programming, there's a lot of nuance to that. And then you have to kind of divide it even further into the competitive weightlifter, the recreational weightlifter, someone like me who uses weightlifting to supplement other sports. Is that something that you deal with or I shouldn't say deal with, that has kind of a negative connotation. Is that something that you engage with at your gym, is kind of a broad spectrum of different athletes?
No, actually, no. I coach strictly weightlifters.
Okay.
I try to stay in my lane because it is so specific.
Right.
I'll hear a lot of strength coaches talk about programming for getting your squat up, getting generally stronger. Powerlifting coaches, but the equation changes dramatically when you have to put the Olympic lifts in the training and still keep getting your squat up, your deadlift up, still keep getting stronger. Because while doing the lifts makes you very specifically strong in that groove. So it is strength training, but it's also practice of the technique at heavy weights. Mm-hmm. You start piling on that volume. It's figuring out the amount of strength training that you need to do to get stronger, especially during strength and hypertrophy phases, but maintaining enough lifts to not lose too much technically. And one of the problems I've run into is technique is very specific to the weight. You can do 80% for thousands of reps, and when you pick up 90%, it will change you technically. If you don't get enough 90% plus lifts in, you don't know how to lift those weights. Your body doesn't know what to do with them. I've seen people who have perfect technique at 80% go haywire at 90. So trying to figure those things out, and one of the other problems is you get it figured out for lifter A. The lifter B, who seems to be at the same level, it doesn't work for them at all.
The difference between an 80 and an 85% lift is definitely something that I struggle with, and I watch other athletes struggle with as well, especially in the snatch. The difference between 135 pounds and 140 pounds for me in a snatch is like I have to completely start over with the whole lift and figure out the whole thing from the bottom up over again. It's actually that sounds frustrating if you're describing it to somebody who's not a weightlifter, but for me it's what keeps me engaged. It's that tiny nuance that keeps me interested in it, because it is this kind of endless, every time you add another change plate to the bar, it's like, oh, it's a new lift again. Starting all over from the beginning.
Well, I think that the technical nature of the sport and the puzzle nature of the programming, I think it attracts a lot of smart people to the sport. A lot of perfectionist people. That's especially lifters, hard to deal with. I mean, my club is like half engineers. And when I was in powerlifting, I don't remember seeing training partners leave for medical school. I'm about to lose my fifth lifter to medical school.
Wow.
There's a lot. That part of the sport, it really draws smart people. Not that powerlifting doesn't or CrossFit doesn't. It's been my experience that a lot of intelligent people end up in the sport. It's kind of the thinking person's barbell sport.
For sure, and there is an analytical requirement. I mean, as a coach, as an athlete, as even an enthusiast, I mean, if you're going to just sit down like I did and watch almost every session at Rio, that would seem really boring, because you're watching the same two lifts performed by 150 different people over and over for 6 attempts each. But it is really interesting to watch because of all that nuance, and you can slow it down, and you can look at, his left ankle didn't flex quite enough, so he wobbled at the bottom of that catch, and so, the ripple effect that has overall, and it's definitely enough to keep you engaged if that is your personality type. I hadn't really thought about that before. It is the thinking man's barbell sport. I think it just gave me a great title for the podcast.
Well, don't call it the thinking man's barbell sport when the sport is half women.
You are completely correct, sir. I stand corrected. So let's tackle that elephant in the room, right? So now we have, in this era, we have transgender athletes, and they want to compete, rightly so, and we're trying to figure out what's really fair, right? So the silver medalist in the women's super heavyweight division this year was from New Zealand. This was a transgender athlete, and I'm kind of passively watching the reaction to that on Facebook, and lots of it is negative. I'm personally very satisfied that Sarah Robles won, because I'm a huge Sarah Robles fan. But how do we crack that nut? Like, the IWF has a protocol. Is it enough?
Let me preface my response by saying, if you talk to any of my more conservative friends like Don McCauley or Tim Swords, they will tell, in their view, I'm a wild-eyed Tommy leftist. I'm a soft and squishy liberal. And I am uncomfortable with it. I don't think their protocol's enough. We're talking about Laurel Hubbard, the New Zealand lifter who took silver. I looked at her lift, and she didn't change until she was 35 years old, or he was 35 years old. That's a problem for me, because the development of the male frame, the bones, the tendons, the attachments, all that, developing for 35 years and then becoming a woman, that is a huge advantage. It's a frame that can carry more muscle. Even if you're careful with the testosterone balance, it's just not enough. I mean, somebody becomes transgender in the first year of their life, they're born, I guess, hermaphroditic. If it's during sometime in their development, I don't know, early teens, I don't have all the answers to this, but how would you like to have been the third place lifter who could have had silver, or the fourth place that could have medaled and were pushed down by somebody who literally had a man's legs? And this is a leg sport. I think, my conservative friends are right to question things like this. I don't want to go so far to the left that I just accept everything without question and then call it, unjust that she can't lift, because you got to think of the other people in the sport. Those women that she beat, they have a beef. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that the answer is they can't lift, but I guess I'm saying I don't have the answer, but I do have a problem with it.
Yeah, and it is it's a tough question to solve, because I don't want to keep anybody out of any sport. Like my whole philosophy is, everybody's got a sport that they should do. I think competitive athletics are for literally everybody at almost any age. I will say after, early childhood. But yeah, you want to make sure it's fair. I mean, a cisgender girl, to use the correct terms, who, has worked her whole life, let's say 20 years, to reach the top of their sport, and has gotten there and goes and gets her clock cleaned. And this happened in women's track and field this year. There was questions about this in women's track and field this past year at Rio. It's not very fair. You're watching this person who you're not really sure about what's going on, and they're just marching away from you. Or in weightlifting, you're watching this person who used to be a dude until pretty recently throw up freaking weights that are, just unfathomable for most women. So it's tough. And so one of the arguments, or one of the solutions that's been presented has been, well, let's just have another division. All right, cool. But then there's a numbers problem, right? Like, weightlifting doesn't have huge global participation already, and so if we're going to have another division, I don't know if that's really a workable solution either. So yeah, I don't know what we should do, but it definitely seems unfair to the girl that got bumped off the podium. It doesn't pass the gut check, I suppose. No,
I don't think it does. And yeah, I don't want to seem. Sports isn't life. It's the rules that make it a level playing field, that make it fair. But the rules are particular to the sport. Our rules don't mean Laurel Hubbard can't get a job, or can't get married, or can't adopt kids, or those things seem important, and fairness and justice, they apply there. But this is just a sport, and we're trying to keep the playing field between competitors as level as possible. And I think that knocks the playing field out of level, because if she's still lifting as a man, as a super heavyweight man, those lifts don't even qualify her for our nationals. But becoming a woman, it puts her on the podium at Worlds. That's a big change.
And I think that's a huge and important point that you just made, that sports are not real life. Sports, for me, are what we do to escape from real life. So,
exactly.
Yeah, we can't make everything fair for everybody, and we have a natural tendency as human beings to try very hard to make everything fair, and especially as Americans, because we believe very strongly that we want everybody to have a fair shot. But that's not always possible, because in some ways, when you give one person a fair shot, sometimes you're taking away from 100 other people to make it happen. So it's a difficult question. Let's talk about more unpleasant things. Is the Russian ban going to stick? So WADA has said they're not going to reinstate the Russian anti-doping agency, because, as it turns out, there never was a Russian anti-doping agency.
Yeah.
How long do you suppose it will be until they either pleasantly forget about it, or until the Russian program can kind of reform itself into something that's acceptable to the rest of the world?
Well, I know that Phil Andrews and a few people from the board, they had high-level meetings with the Russian Federation. I think a good bit of that was PR, but there may have been some sincere efforts there by the Russians, because I literally think they don't know how to run a national level program without the drugs. if they're doing it at all, they're taking baby steps and figuring it out. I did just read yesterday, I think it was an opinion piece in the New York Times about how this ban actually helps Putin win his re-election. It's like the day after it was announced, or 2 days after he announced he's running for president, another 6-year term, which he's guaranteed to win. If the ban stays, if they continue to be banned until they reconstitute or allow some sort of real drug testing within their country, it's probably not in Putin's interest to allow that to happen, because as long as he can paint Russia as, the victim and him as its defender, he keeps staying the leader of the country and maintaining popular support. However, I don't think we can throw a nation or a world of clean athletes under the bus to address the internal politics of Russia. I don't know if this ban's going to stick or not, because there's so many moving parts to this. There's the political questions that filter their way into sport. There's the money, the IOC money. You're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business. And, the oligarchs in Russia willing to throw billions at those people who want more billions. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what's going to happen. Well, it'll be interesting to watch. I don't know what I would do. Well, like the transgender issue, I'm not smarter than the people who are addressing it right now. So I don't know what would help. I just want to see the cheaters kept off the platform.
Well, and I think it's going to take a lot of, I think maybe you're underselling yourself. I think it's going to take a lot of loud, passionate voices from the weightlifting community worldwide to turn that tide. As long as there is enough external pressure to keep dirty lifters off the platform as much as possible. I mean, there are always going to be people who can game the rules, right? That's the nature of human competition. There's always somebody looking for a loophole or breaking the rules altogether and just trying to get away with it. You're going to have a percentage that's going to happen. But as long as there is sufficient scrutiny and pressure to keep the sport as clean as possible, I think true reform can happen. But I think it is important to remember those points that you brought up, that in Russia, sports are national pride and they are a tool of geopolitics, because the Russian Sports Federation is tied to the Russian government and is a tool of diplomacy, as it were. One of the points that was brought up in Icarus, the documentary, was that they used Sochi as a cover for their invasion of Crimea. And how I didn't notice that when it happened, I don't know, because I count myself as a fairly astute observer of world events, but that blew my mind, that they threw the Winter Olympics and bankrupted themselves throwing them. I mean, they spent a lot of money on Sochi, purely so they could so that Putin would have the political backing at home to walk into Crimea. It's amazing stuff. You kind of just have, at the point, you have to sit back and look at Putin and go, man, you're good. You're really good at what you do.
Yeah, well, yeah, our current president is way overmatched.
Yeah, he's out of his depth for sure.
He's way out of his depth.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would like to see it get to the point where I had a lifter from Ukraine who just didn't, he just didn't understand why we didn't cheat. He made the personal decision himself that he didn't want to do that to his body, but he thought it was perfectly fine that they did it. And he said, well, plenty of Americans have been popped. Plenty of Americans have been caught cheating. That's true. We have people here who try to cheat. The difference is we catch them. They never see the international platform. Go find the last time an American lifter tested positive at an international meet.
Go outside of weightlifting for a moment. When we catch dopers in any sport, what happens to them? They're crucified. I mean, they're absolute, and sometimes unjustly so. Like the treatment Lance Armstrong got, given the climate of cycling at the time, I think my personal opinion was it was a bit unfair. Now, he made it a lot harder on himself than he needed to by kind of being an asshole to everybody.
Yep.
But, I remember when I was a kid when Darryl Strawberry got popped, right? And he was vilified in the media. I mean, absolutely, trotted out, tarred and feathered. Just he became a joke. Like his name became a punchline. That doesn't exactly happen in Russia and Eastern European countries. Even when lifters do get caught, they become victims, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, we catch people here that they get banned. They don't make it on our international teams.
Right.
As long as international sport and success internationally supports Putin or the government that's sponsoring the sport, government-supported sport, I don't think they're going to go for that, especially if Putin wins or people like Putin win either way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they get reinstated, they cheat, they win. You know, it raises their international status of the country and their leader. They get banned, the leader's status raises because he's defending the honor of his country. You know, so my personal belief, if it's not going to help that country one way or the other, ban them. You know, keep Russia banned until they can absolutely prove that they're addressing the problem themselves, or allowing an organization like WADA to come in and freely address it independently without having a Russian heart attack.
Well, and maybe an organization with a little more, I don't know, authority or independence or what the word is than WADA, who doesn't exactly have a spotless record when it comes to pursuing doping allegations themselves.
No, I mean, a good part of that, I think, is how much of their funding comes from the IOC. And again, it goes back to the IOC and money. Mm-hmm. You know, the IOC they need to find funding for WADA that doesn't depend on the IOC, so it's truly independent. I mean, there's even overlap in the governing bodies between WADA and the IOC. That right. Has to be completely. You can't hold seats on their board or positions of power in WADA and in the IOC. More of their funding has to come from member nations. Maybe we require a certain amount of funding from member nations so that less of it directly to WADA, not through the IOC. But something needs to be done there to make WADA more independent. I mean, I think there are good people with integrity in WADA. There certainly are in USADA. I mean, there's a reason when Worlds was held here in 2015, the number of positives when USADA was the WADA representative doing the testing here skyrocketed because we actually had honest testing. Again, in 2017, we need to get to that level of independence and integrity on a worldwide basis, but definitely in those countries like Russia. And let's not let China off the hook. Remember, China's not here because they're on that list of nine countries that were banned.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they're the hot weightlifting country that, you know, somehow we believe maybe they're doing it clean. And that's something I wanted to bring up. When we have these cheaters in the sport, it's not just that they're cheating the clean athletes and pushing them off the medal stand. The worst thing that having these cheaters in the sport does is that many of the rest of us in the sport start to doubt anybody's accomplishment. What was the Georgian super heavyweight that just snatched 220? First time, I mean, Tony Krostev's 216 from 1987 has stood that long. And Taranenko's 476 total has stood since, what, 88? You know, and he breaks them. And my first thought was, that fucking guy's not clean.
Yeah.
But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. But all that culture of cheating from the former Eastern Bloc and from China, you know, immediately it makes me doubt whether these people who are winning can be clean. You know, there's a little bit of doubt in my mind with Lydia Valentin. And I owe a good bit of that doubt to these cheating assholes from the former Eastern Bloc and from China.
It is tough because you watch these performances, and as an athlete, a coach, a fan of the sport, you want to stand and cheer, and you do if you're polite. Stand and cheer. Like watching Lasha, I can't pronounce his last name to save my life, so I won't murder it in front of thousands and thousands of listeners. But watching his performance in the snatch, the way he just imperiously just came out and with an attitude of dominance crushed those lifts was impressive to watch. And the crowd was going crazy, and it was a cool atmosphere, and they practically had pyrotechnic displays like at the venue. They did a very good job. But yeah, it is tempered, and it sucks because you want to be a fan of the sport, but when you have these doubts in the back of your mind about, well, man, I don't know, maybe that guy's not doping anymore, but maybe he did for 20 years, and it's not like those gains went away overnight. Yeah, it really sucks that we have to think those things about the sport, and that's really it's tempered my enthusiasm for the other sports that I follow, for track and field and for cycling as well, because there's been so much wrong in those sports. Where I look at guys like Justin Gatlin, who no doubt works hard as a fantastic athlete, the second fastest sprinter in the world, right? Nipping Usain Bolt at the heels. But he's served bans before, and I can't really be a fan of his at that point. It takes away from the fans as much, I think, as at least the fans who give a shit. It takes away from us as much as it takes away from the sport itself. Now, I will make exceptions for sports like football and baseball because their job is to entertain us.
Right.
I think it's less of a physical measurement at that point and more of an entertainment product. And when the whole thing with Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire was going down a bunch of years ago, I famously took the stance that I want those guys on as many steroids as they can cram in their bodies, because otherwise baseball is insufferably boring to watch. So I want them to hit home runs into next year. And if it takes a lot of steroids to do it, then by golly, let's have it, because it's the only way I'm going to sit down and watch baseball. Which I suppose is pretty hypocritical of me. But then Roger Maris's 61 home run record stood forever. He gets to lose that record to people who used things that were against the rules that he didn't get to use. He wasn't alive to see his record fall, but do people like that deserve to lose their records that they, won clean? Well, and then there's the whole question about retroactively changing records, right? So Roger Maris wasn't on what Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were on. We don't know if he was on anything, but there were definitely performance-enhancing drugs available of different kinds during that era. I mean, there's a famous story about, the first Tour de France, the riders were all doing cocaine, to stay on the... So, it's hard to say that, in some halcyon bygone era that all of the athletes were necessarily clean, but then maybe we just can't compare records era to era anymore now that we know what we know.
Well, that's probably true. I know back in the late 50s, early 60s, amphetamines were available to them, but amphetamines might keep you alert enough to get good wood on a curveball that you might not otherwise, but it wasn't going to give you the power to drive it 400 feet. To the opposite field.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So the pleasant side effect of the 9 nations banned from international competition at the moment is that Americans on the top step, Americans on the third step, Americans all over the top 10 in many different categories, which was a lot of fun to watch. But this is America, damn it. We only like gold medals. So what puts more Americans on the top step of the podium across weight classes and in both men and women?
Well, I think we keep doing what we're doing. The coaches keep talking to each other. One thing I'd like to see some maybe regional or statewide coaches conferences where we just get together and talk about this stuff. What are you doing that works? What do you think might work? This is what I'm doing. Comparing notes. CrossFit and I think there's going to be a threshold at which weightlifting keeps getting more popular based on its own presence, its own activity, not depending on CrossFit. CrossFit rode a huge wave. I think there's an even bigger wave like that coming for weightlifting. It's assuming a higher profile. I know when this wave of new athletes came in from CrossFit, there were a lot of older coaches saying we're never going to get any world champions from CrossFit. But clearly they're wrong, And that's getting more kids in it. One of the things I have thought is coming out of China and the old Soviet Union, those state-supported programs where they get kids in it early, this idea that we have to have kids when they're 10 or 12 years old or they can't be world champions. I think that's wrong. They need to have a widely varied athletic background, yes. But those 10,000 hours that they talk about, that doesn't all have to be in weightlifting. We've had very high-level weightlifters that have taken up this sport in their late teens and early 20s. Potential world champions if the cheaters are out of the way. It doesn't take as long to get world-class technique as, 15 years from childhood to your mid-20s.
Right, and famously, Sarah Robles picked up a barbell in 2004. She was, I think in college, she was a field athlete, discus and shot put. Wes Kitts, who is up and coming, I would say, has only been in the sport, 4 years maybe, and is freakishly strong. Boy, is it fun to watch him pull on a barbell. But yeah, I think you're onto something there, that if you have a general athleticism and you have, sort of the right physiology for it, it helps to have, those short levers and not be terribly long like I am, and have good knees and a strong back and things like that. But, you don't have to start. You probably should be familiar with a barbell. It'd be nice to be exposed to it at an early age, but that you definitely don't need to specialize, at 12 years old, and you're going to be a weightlifter until you're 40. Yeah.
Speaking as a coach, I would rather you build your athleticism without ever having touched a barbell. Because if this mistake happens all the time, people, well, you won't want me. I've been a figure skater, I've been a gymnast, and I've never touched a barbell. No, you're exactly who I want, because I can teach you exactly how to do this without you building any bad habits. It's a lot of work to undo damage done by, one of the problems with CrossFit is if they get with a coach who doesn't know that much, and then they do tens of thousands of lifts with bad technique, it's really hard to break that motor pattern. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of backtracking. So, yeah, never touch the barbell is fine with me. Come on.
So what you're saying is the whole violent contact with the bar thing is a lot of work to overcome.
Do I say shit like that on Facebook that often? No. The guy from, I don't know his name, the guy from Squat University who said that, he has a lot of valuable things to say, but he's out of his lane when he says things like that. That is just wrong. I don't know any high-level coach who says you need to have violent contact with your hips to the bar. Tim Swords doesn't say that. Don doesn't say that. I don't think there's somebody on the world team that has mentioned violent contact with the bar. So I'm not sure where that comes from. I mean, even Mike Bergner, he's the weightlifting guru in CrossFit, doesn't say that. Right. I mean, I asked him after that conversation, he said, I don't teach that. It's like, where does this come from?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I can tell you from firsthand and frustrating experience, because I am a very junior coach, that I see that cue a lot, or I hear that cue a lot in CrossFit gyms, and I don't know where it comes from either, because even just a cursory common sense check tells you that that's not how you should do it, because if your hips make violent contact with the bar, it goes forward. And how many lifts do you see missed with the bar going forward? Trick question, all of them. 9 out of 10 misses happen forward. Missing a lift behind you is impossible in the clean, and pretty rare in the snatch, I would say, comparatively speaking.
It's rare to non-existent in the snatch in CrossFit. It's fairly common in good weightlifting gyms.
Right. Yeah.
Because you'll be a little bit, you rush the lift a little bit, it'll be out front if you're a good weightlifter. You won't get your arms in it, it'll loop a little bit and go behind you. But CrossFitters invariably miss all their lifts forward.
You're right.
Or say things like, I should have gotten under that, it was right here, a foot in front of their face. Well, that's approximately 11.5 inches too far forward.
Guilty as charged. I've lost track of the number of lifts that I've pulled plenty high enough that were a foot in front of me.
Yeah.
But, it's...
Like real estate. Location.
Exactly. So you've got one athlete with you at the American Open Finals?
Yeah, it should have been about 5. But
okay.
What with injuries from outside the gym and other things, I'm down to 1.
Okay. So tell me about Mr. Tino Vargas.
Tino used to be a pole vaulter, like my 3rd pole vaulter. He went to Mount Union University, which you might know from winning, I don't know how many Division III football championships.
Oh, yeah.
But he was on the track team, pole vaulter. Graduated from there, and about a year and a half ago got into weightlifting.
So kind of the guy you're talking about where he hadn't touched a barbell before he got to you?
He had, but not much in the way of Olympic lifts. He had to do a lot of upper body work. Pole vaulters have to have very strong upper bodies. Halfway decent squatter, but really hadn't done much in the way of Olympic lifts. But a really explosive athlete. I mean, he's really a baby in this, and I don't think he knows just how much potential he has.
How much potential do you think he has? He's not listening, is he? Maybe maybe we should hush our voices a little bit. But how
I
far
don't know. Yeah, he's got a serious job now, working his way into like regional management positions and stuff like that. It'll depend on how much he can devote to this. It's hard to tell until you got about maybe 5 years in the sport just how far a good athlete can go. I think he can go very far. There's no reason he can't, aim at the podium at nationals. But it's going to take a few years and,
Sure.
some luck with injury. He's on the cusp of a 300 total right now, which is, like you're just getting your foot in the door.
And I mean, I could retire with a 200 total and be pretty happy with myself, but that's the difference between a supplemental weightlifter and a competitive weightlifter for sure.
But you could probably do better than that. I can help.
Well, I'm gonna hold you to that. We're gonna have to trek up to North Ohio and find out all the things that I'm doing wrong. I'm aware of most of them. It just takes time to fix them. So you touched on something there. Tino's got a job. Competitive athletes, even at a national level in a lot of other countries, don't have to because they have a stipend to go just train all the time. Maybe they have a side job or something like that. But is there a way forward for U.S. sports in general, outside of the ball and stick sports, outside of the moneymakers, to create the sort of professionalized athletic program that a lot of other countries enjoy?
Well, it's all about money. And the higher profile the sport is, the more sponsors we attract, like Rogue, who is just brilliant at marketing and branding.
Yes,
Look out Alico, because they're going to blow right past Alico. Yeah, I know, sacrilege, right?
Them's fighting words right there.
I'm not taking sides. It's just an independent observation.
Yeah, no, they're very good. Their branding is incredible. Their advertising is very good. They've got good, what I call bro buy-in from the rank and file in the sport. One of the things I like that they do is come out with special barbells. Like, let's get real. A barbell is a very simple tool, and you can fancy it up with really good bearings and things like that, and you can polish it or galvanize it or put different color, whatever. But to have something that's branded the Pyros bar is freaking brilliant. Like, that's to brand
or
a
the
bar
different
with
colored bar.
yeah,
Cerakote bar.
to brand a
Yeah,
bar
tell you
with
what.
arguably the greatest weightlifter of all time, like that's real good.
As soon as they come out with a camo Cerakote bar, that thing's just and it's coming. It's just going to go through the roof.
I think I saw that when I was at Rogue a couple of months ago. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw one of those on the rack.
Yeah, that's that's going to sell well.
Absolutely.
But that kind of company coming into the sport, they're starting to as a company sponsor athletes like C.J. Cummings and Matty Rogers. That will help. I think somehow finding a way we're always looking for the athletes to sponsor, but we don't look much at the coaches who bring them up. Don McCauley has talked about this, and I think he's right. Some other people have talked about it. You got to start finding the coaches who are producing and start rewarding them for doing that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be as much as the athletes. I mean, we're the jockeys, they're Secretariat. Nobody knows who rode Secretariat to the Triple Crown.
True story. Yeah.
But still, those coaches at local clubs, I mean, they're the pointy tip of the spear. They're the ones going out, finding the athletes, bringing them in the sport, teaching them initial technique, bringing them along, and keeping them in the sport through the rough spots like getting a driver's license in high school, breakups with boyfriends and girlfriends, going to college and still figuring out how to train, or finding a good coach that's near the college that they leave for, keeping them in the sport when they're out of college and have to work a job, like you said. The athletes need money for getting past those, but I think we're getting that in place. There's more and more of it. But we got to do something to encourage the coaches, keep the coaches in it. Because I'm telling you, I obviously talk with my wife about this all the time. I'm sure I've spent $50,000 on this sport that I will never see again. I am, rich weightlifting coach is an oxymoron. The people who appear to be doing the very best in this sport aren't doing as well as it looks.
Well, for sure. I mean, look at the demise of Muscle Driver. I mean, by all accounts, they were doing well. They had what appeared to be a thriving business, and they just couldn't keep it up because the financials weren't there or whatever. And I'm not privy to the inside game on that, but clearly, if there was enough money to go around, they'd still be up, right?
Yeah, and they overreached a bit.
Sure.
And there's some inside stuff going on there, but I think the upshot is they overreached a little too early. Rogue could probably do that. They don't need to.
Right.
Yeah. So I've told people before, if Rogue slapped their label on toilet paper, it'd be the top-selling toilet paper in the fitness industry.
Don't think they haven't thought of it, mind you.
But yeah, there's a lot of different things that can be done. But like my own life, virtually all of my and my wife's problems would be solved by more money. The more money that comes into the sport, the more options we have for trying different things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's happening.
Yeah, I think it's coming. So there is a wave coming. What do you think are the things that weightlifting as a whole, maybe as the national sanctioning body or even as individual coaches, that we need to keep an eye out for to make sure that we catch this wave and don't miss it and become, kind of slide back down into obscurity?
Boy, you're bringing up some questions I hadn't really thought about that much. I'm really in the gym coach. I suck at recruiting. I suck at marketing. I'm pretty good at making weightlifters. Let's see. I think about what can I do. First of all, make sure the potential lifters know I'm there. As a local club, make sure they know about us. I think we could have had this wave if we didn't have Phil Andrews in place as the CEO of USA Weightlifting. I don't know that we would have taken advantage of this wave. The guy's been brilliant at almost every turn, and I almost begged the board to take him as the CEO when they were looking for a new CEO, and it's working out great. Having people like Phil Andrews in place, having good coaches who can make the local community aware that they exist, that they do this. When that wave happens, when that money happens, we need to have people who are ready to do stuff with it.
Right.
And I'm not the big picture guy. That's Phil. He's dealing with that stuff. But yeah, one thing I can do is the more people that find out about this and make sure that people know my club is around, that when interest builds in the area, they know that they need to come to Rubber City Weightlifting. And just every club that's like that can do that, make sure their community knows they're there and what they do, I think that's probably one of the best ways to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think the marketing thing that you touched on, that you were ruining your ability on, is a huge deal. So there's a lot of these little local competitions that nobody knows about unless you're already a weightlifter, and I think that's a crime because some really strong people show up, and it's entertaining to watch. Everybody loves to watch people throw heavy stuff up in the air. So I think maybe just doing that grassroots, hey, we're having a meet, come watch for free, kind of stuff to create a broader general public awareness, not even from the athletes, but from just people who like to watch sports, will kind of help. And the more people kind of see it happening at the grassroots level, maybe they'll want to watch it on TV more. We go from ESPN3 to ESPN2. It's the little baby steps to kind of bring us into a wider national recognition. It's a very spectator-friendly sport. You can get right up next to the platform if you want at a lot of these meets, depending on the size of the gym and things like that, or if it's at a gym or if it's at a convention center, things like that. So the athletes themselves are very accessible. There's a lot of pluses, compared to a lot of other spectator sports, where if those are marketed correctly, and if USA Weightlifting Board is listening, if this can be marketed correctly, it'll really help catch that wave. And because I think that we're already seeing the CrossFit wave sort of recede a little bit, not a bunch, but there are some early signs that that has crested at least. So now I think now really is the time for weightlifting as a sport to look internally and figure out what they're going to do to keep that momentum going.
I think maybe one of the things that will help that, CrossFit didn't invent anything. Mm-hmm. They do circuit training, but they were brilliant at marketing it. Even for fitness, for general fitness, it's not the best way to train. Strength training and actually paying attention to your diet will get you the same body, if not a better one. and you don't have to run in circles or carry sandbags or, finding a way to make weightlifting a fitness option, that would help expand the awareness of the sport. Because it's not that hard for me to train somebody as a recreational weightlifter, help them with their diet, and get to the place they want to be without running around the building carrying a sandbag, or ripping the meat off their shins on a box, or the meat off their hands and doing a million butterfly pull-ups, or destroying their shoulders. So that might be a way to go.
Absolutely.
Brand weightlifting as a fitness option too.
Well, like you said, it's CrossFit without all that heavy breathing.
Yeah, or bleeding.
Or bleeding, If you're bleeding, and I won't say that I haven't bloodied my shins pulling a barbell, because that happens. But yeah, a lot less bleeding.
Yeah, and fewer devastated shoulders.
Right. So speaking of longevity and health, you have turned 61 today, and you're still getting after it, which is kind of not all that usual for someone who's been in weightlifting and barbell sports for as long as you. I saw you recently were pulling 400 off the floor, which is like, I have a good day when I pull 400 off the floor. So what's been your secret to longevity? What is your fountain of youth, Coach Bell?
Wow. First of all, I've been like a competitive athlete since, I was 8 or 10 years old. Mm-hmm. Always competing through wrestling and football and baseball in high school, soccer, rugby. I got into strongman and basically lifting rocks in a park by myself just because I like to pick up heavy things. I got into powerlifting. Then I got into Olympic weightlifting way too late to be good at it. But at a certain point, I became more of a coach than a lifter and just stopped lifting. I didn't lift for 12 years. I didn't train at all for 12 years. My knees were shot, and I couldn't wrap my head around the idea of training like just to feel better or live longer, because I always trained for something, to compete, to win. Yeah, I had no idea how people just go train to feel better. But one day, I got both knees replaced. They're both titanium now. And my knees started feeling better enough to do some stuff. I talked to my doctor, and he said, as long as you don't do impact things like moving your feet and catching a clean, go get as strong as you want. They should be fine. So I started squatting again and deadlifting again. And I've only been doing that for about, 6 months. And the strength, if you are a strength athlete for long enough, your body's set point for how much muscle it wants to carry and how strong you are kind of readjusts up. So it didn't take me very long at all to get back to a 400 deadlift. I mean, I've deadlifted 600, so it doesn't seem like that much to me. And I mostly put it up on Instagram just to goad my lifter Paul into like working his deadlift harder. Don't let the old man beat you. And I got like 250,000 views on Instagram for some beat up old jock lifting baby weight. I don't understand. But okay. If me deadlifting is going to be how I market the club, fine.
Yeah, no, but I think you're actually doing a lot more than you're giving yourself credit there for, because how many 61-year-olds do you know? And granted, you run on some pretty strong circles, but how many of your sextagenarian friends can pull 4 plates off the floor?
Well, none.
Well, okay. That's kind of the point. Like, you're at an age where a lot of your peers are struggling to tie their shoes, and you're out there pulling freaking, half a Volkswagen off the floor. I think that's something to put out there. One of the things we do on the podcast a lot is we talk about people who are trying to change kind of the culture of health and fitness, right? Trying to shift the expectation of what a healthy life can look like in America, because we have a very bad impression of that. And I think guys like you are part of that. Like, yeah, okay, so you didn't train for 12 years because you had to kind of mentally shift what the point of your training was, and you came back in and you're like, hey, this is cool, I can still do this. And you had that to fall back on because you spent so much time developing yourself physically for all those years. So it's possible, and it's not too late. And, by the way, pick up heavy things and put them down because it's good for you.
It's the fountain of youth. It really is. Resistance training is the fountain of youth. I think Mark Ripito talks about this a lot. But the most important fitness parameter is strength. It's how you interact with the world. It's production of force against an outside resistance, which is walking or picking up or carrying the groceries in or bending down to pick up your grandkid. You know, do strength training. Stronger is fitter. You know, there's a reason Donnie Shankle can never, ever do anything that makes him breathe hard. And is it Grace, the 30 snatches in a row?
That's
135.
Grace is clean and jerks. Isabel is snatches.
Yeah. There's a reason Donnie Shankle can walk up to a 135 bar and do that in a minute 37. He almost died breathing after. Yeah, in jeans, after having smoked a cigarette. It's because he's so strong that isn't anything. It's like a broomstick to him.
Yeah. I watched a guy do Isabel. He's a former Ohio State football player who lives locally here, and he did Isabel at a CrossFit competition, and it looked like he was beating the floor with a barbell. Like he was just, like he was fanning a flame with a blanket. Like that was basically his. There was no technique. It was just the fact that he's like this brutally strong man, and he just. I felt bad for the weights when he was done. They were abused. Like it was so cool, but it was so fun to watch. Like my jaw's on the floor. Like. Just incredible to watch how strong that guy was. But like you're saying, you know, he's going to be able to do that well into old age because that's his physiological normal.
Yeah, it's, you know, in my mind, you just keep fighting until they start shoveling dirt in your face. I was actually thinking about this. No particular lifter of mine, but lifters I've had who seem to give up. You can see that come over their face when something's a little too much for them and they just sort of quit. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to give them that fight. It's not the success. If you're in it for success and that's the only thing driving you, you're not going to be very good. The people who are good are in it for the fight because they love the fight. If you don't have that fight in you, it's hard to be a competitive athlete, you know, at least and stay in it for a while. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I just want to grab him by the shoulders and shake him and say, fight back. You know, you're not fighting a person. You're just fighting a barbell. You're fighting yourself. Mm-hmm. But fight back.
You're fighting time. You know, you're fighting sarcopenia, you know, the muscle falling off your bone as you age. You're fighting osteoporosis. You're fighting joints that are wearing out. But if you're not fighting, you're going to lose all that stuff anyway. So you might as well fight and at least stay in it for as long as you can. There's piles and piles and piles of scientific literature that talks about strength as the greatest predictor of all-cause mortality. Not that it's causative, but it's definitely correlative. And there are some logical causative things. Like if you trip and you can't catch yourself because you aren't strong enough, then you hit the floor and you break. You know, that's kind of how that works. You know, I've seen it time after time. You know, people just don't have the requisite strength to walk down a flight of stairs safely and unassisted. And if their hands are full and they can't hold onto the railing, it's a crisis. Like, that's a safety thing at that point. That you've now lost a physical capability that's required of you as a human being. So yeah, get strong, man.
Squat.
And squat.
You gotta squat.
Jesus loves a deep squat, right?
Jesus loves you more when you squat deep.
No, it's true.
I mean, going to hell.
Well, you know, you'll be in good company. Jesus loves you when you squat deep. Your knees love you better when you squat deep. There's all kinds of like interesting stuff coming out now about, you know, the shear forces and compressive forces are actually at their peak above 90 degrees. So, you know, get lower and it's easier on your knees because you spend less time in that position of compromise above 90 degrees, and you spend more time in mechanically advantageous positions at the bottom of a squat where you can recruit more muscles and center your knee on the, you know, all those nice nerdy things that were boring people to tears if we dove into on a podcast without a bunch of diagrams and stuff to show them what the hell we're talking about. So, Coach Bell, this has been really fun. We could go on and on about this, but eventually you've got to go coach a weightlifter. So I want to wrap up with a question that I sometimes introduce to my more fun guests, and I think that you qualify. Let's say Mount Rushmore fell down, and they're coming to you, Daniel Bell, in Northeast Ohio to say, who are we putting on the new Mount Rushmore of weightlifting?
Of weightlifting.
Who are your four faces?
Wow. Guy who I consider to be, you know, one of my more important mentors, Don McCauley, mostly for his diplomatic ability. If people in the know will know, he does not possess any. I'd like to put Phil Andrews up there.
Okay.
Let's see. That leaves 2 empty slots. I got to throw some lifters up there. Let's throw Maddie Rogers up there because she is sucking so many people into the sport. Just so many. I know she's only bronze medalist so far, so let's throw Maddie Rogers up there. And
yeah, I think, and let's hit that for a second. So only bronze medalist, had kind of a tough day, but works freaking hard, puts her head down, has a great attitude, and is not shy about having hard days in front of other people, which I think is a big deal for any competitive athlete. How do you? I wanted to touch on this actually. I'm glad you mentioned her. How do you coach a lifter through a tough day like that? Like she did well, but didn't meet her own expectations, I think is a fair way to put it for her lifts on that day.
Those expectations undermine lifters so much every day. They come in the gym and, like last week I did X, so today I should be able to do Y. As soon as you say that, you're starting to beat yourself. Because every day you come in the gym, you are a different lifter. Your body's different. Your mind's different. Your experiences over the last few days, what happened in the cycle before this, all of those things change. Developing that ability to live in the day, accept what the day gives you, and then move on, I think that's an important part of developing an elite athlete's mindset. And an elite athlete's mindset doesn't develop any faster than their body or their technique. It's a matter of habit, coming in the gym and paying attention to it. But those expectations, I think that's what devastates people and drives them out of the sport, especially early on. If you get with a coach who's a good technical coach, you get those novice strength gains, and you have that initial period of PR after PR because you're improving technically so fast. When that starts to slow down and you expect that train to keep rolling, that's a big hump for people to get over. Just because you're at Maddie's level doesn't mean she isn't fighting a lot of the same problems that other athletes fight. And this could be like one of those watershed moments that carries her to the top of the podium, where she realizes, I haven't had my best day, but did I need my best day? I need the best I'm capable of today. And I'll undermine my focus, possibly my progress or my commitment to the sport, if I keep coming through the door of, this is what I have to do. I have to get here, or my time's been wasted, or I'm less worthy as a human being. I've said this, before, that at a certain point in your career, I think you have to become a better person to become a better lifter. Your focus has to be better. You have to cut yourself more slack. You have to be more coachable. To some degree, I think you have to think of the people around you and get outside yourself. You'll see that really high-level lifters tend to be helpful to other lifters. People who've been on world teams, they'll be out there cheering for their teammates who haven't made that level yet. If you do this right, if you have the right people influencing you, I think you can become and probably have to become a better person to become the best athlete you can be.
That is
unless you're just
solid advice. No, it is. Look. So here's the thing. There's a practical side to what you just said. Humans are social animals, right? No one does well on their own psychologically. And in a sport that is so psychological as weightlifting, because, man, your head better be right when you're putting yourself under a heavy barbell. You've got to be totally focused. You've got to be totally balanced. Everything's got to go well. I've had days where I was physically primed. I was tapered or I was rested or whatever. I'd had a really good strength cycle. I should go in there and just nail lifts. But I go in there and I'm distracted because real life is doing real life things. And I'm missing everything. I can't even stick a 70% lift to save my freaking life because my head's just not there. So, yeah, you've got to have the support system around you. You've got to have people that you can trust and confide in. You've got to have personal rapport with your coaches. You have to be a good person to be a good weightlifter, and the higher you get, the better and more balanced and, to a large degree. And, of course, we're painting with broad strokes here. There are some people who can just get away with it. But, yeah, I think that's a big deal, and I think it's why a lot of sport coaches across all different sports are employing sports psychologists now to get that mental edge, to get their athletes in whatever discipline they're in, whether it's MMA or it's weightlifting or it's football or whatever, to get the most out of their athletes by getting their brain not out of the way necessarily, but get their brain to not interfere with the process.
We live in a country, we're lucky to live in a country like this. We don't have problems finding food. Mm-hmm. There are not mortar shells exploding outside our door. We have the opportunity to be able to become great athletes. So most of the obstacles that any athlete faces becoming better at their sport, especially in this sport where you don't have an opponent, your opponent's yourself, most of your obstacles are between your ears. You're going to have to overcome your own psychological limitations and get better at that. You're going to have to become better internally to keep making progress externally. You have to beat yourself.
In any sport where there is an element of danger, and I think in any individual sport, I think there is that element of danger, right? So Kevin Schwantz was a 500cc world champion in motorcycle racing in the mid-'90s, and he said 99% of motorcycle racing is between the ears. It's how hard can you commit yourself to getting as close to mortal danger as you can. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but putting 400 pounds over your head, that could kill you if you do it badly. So there's a lot of, your lizard brain is telling you, please don't do this to me the whole time. And you have to be able to overcome that, with your rationality and confidence and finding that mental place, man. It's a challenge every time I put a hand on a barbell, even at my lowly level,
Well, that's why I try to keep it below my head now. My shoulders wouldn't let me put a bar over my head anyway.
Sure. Well, we got way off track there, man. We went down a rabbit hole for forever. You have one more face to put on Mount Rushmore. You've got Phil Andrews, Matty Rogers, Don McCauley.
Don McCauley. Guy I've been listening to a lot lately. Just getting back to basics, and not necessarily in weightlifting. And this will piss off a lot of people because he doesn't have he makes Don McCauley look like a touchy-feely, sensitive guy. Mark Ripito.
Okay. Yeah.
He's got the personality of a sunburned rattlesnake, but he's right about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely, like you're saying, is not the most diplomatic man in the world, but he has so many important and correct things to say that you better pay attention when his mouth opens because there's probably some wisdom coming out of it. Yeah, I think that's solid. I think if everybody looked to those four people, they'd have a lot better time in the sport and probably a lot better time in life. Coach Bell, this has been incredible. I've taken up way too much of your time. This is going to be a really fun show to edit and get out to our fans. Where should people come find you when you're not in Anaheim coaching future national champions?
Rubber City Weightlifting, located at Unrivaled Strength in North Canton, Ohio.
Outstanding. And that's rubbercityweightlifting.org is the website. Is there anywhere else people should follow you online?
We got Rubber City Weightlifting on Facebook. Or, you can come to my page. I'm trying to shift people over to Rubber City Weightlifting, trying to be more professional. I might be too old to learn to be more professional, but, hey, I wore a shirt with a collar today.
And the irony is I'm in a hoodie, so, go.
Well, there's no video to this.
Right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to sit down with you again, maybe in person in a few months' time. And good luck to your lifter this weekend. And we'll have to sit down and debrief his performance again soon.
Okay. And you're welcome at the gym anytime. Feel free.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right.